When I was a young kid, I'm a Napolitano, born in the Bronx. Different trip, man. Hey, you elect me. I'm gonna end out Ukraine war in 24 hours. All right. Mertz, Heil Mertz, we're building up our military. We have to stop those Russians.
The cracks are showing. Nations once dependent on Washington's financial system are now building their own, and some of the world's biggest economies are no longer afraid to push back. The question is no longer if the US dollar will lose its crown, it's when. The rise of economic independence. American trend forecaster Gerald Celente recently sent ripples through the financial world with a blunt prediction. The dominance of the US dollar is already fading. Speaking to Cuban-American journalist Rick Sanchez, Celente said the shift is being driven by countries like India and China, economic powerhouses that have been quietly insulating themselves from Washington's influence. India's recent decision to continue buying Russian oil despite US sanctions is a prime example. According to Celente, the move wasn't about defiance for its own sake, it was about economics. Only 2% of India's GDP comes from trade with the United States. That number, he explained, means Washington's threats carry far less weight than they once did. India's economy is increasingly self-sustaining, producing and consuming its own goods, rather than relying heavily on imports from the West. This kind of independence, Celente noted, is what the United States itself once enjoyed, an internal economic engine that could power growth without depending on outside supply chains. But now, that advantage has shifted to rising economies in the East. China's transformation into a tech powerhouse. Celente also pointed to China's extraordinary transformation over the past few decades. Not long ago, the country lacked the heavy industry and high-tech expertise to compete with Western powers. But today, China is a leader in both sectors, from advanced manufacturing to renewable energy technologies. The electric vehicle market is one striking example. Chinese companies are rolling out models at a pace that has left competitors scrambling. For Celente, this isn't just about market competition, it's about the foundation of economic power. A nation that can build its own technology, supply its own infrastructure, and export high-value products doesn't need to rely on the dollar-based global system in the same way. And when two of the world's largest countries, India and China, follow that path, the effects ripple across the global economy. US tariffs and a growing rift. These shifts in economic power aren't happening in a vacuum. Washington's recent trade policies have added fuel to the fire. The US imposed a 50% tariff on Indian goods after New Delhi refused to stop buying Russian oil. Brazil, another member of the BRICS bloc, has also faced new tariffs. Such measures have strained relationships that were already complicated. In a recent phone call, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi discussed the economic impact of US tariffs. Rather than backing down, they agreed to strengthen trade ties and even explore expanding their bilateral trade agreement. Lula confirmed he will visit India in early 2026 to advance these goals.
To answer this, it takes an understanding of how economic power collided with circumstance and whether the group can overcome some big hurdles. But first, the acronym BRIC was coined in 2001 by Jim O'Neill, who at the time was an economist with Goldman Sachs.
I thought it was quite clear that so-called emerging markets were going to become more important to businesses.
Moves like these signal that BRICS nations aren't simply reacting to US policies. They're actively building alternative trade networks designed to bypass Washington's influence. What business is it of mine? Celente's frustration was clear when Sanchez asked him about US intervention in other nations' trade decisions. What business is it of mine as an American? What India and Russia do with each other? How dare you say what they should do? This sentiment taps into a growing international view. Sovereignty matters. For many nations, the US dictating who they can or cannot trade with has become unacceptable. And in the context of a multipolar world, where economic power is spread among several major players rather than concentrated in one, enforcing such dictates becomes increasingly difficult. The weight of numbers. The BRICS bloc now represents more than 40% of the global population. India and China each have around 1.4 billion people, compared to America's 347 million. Population size isn't everything, but when paired with economic growth, it becomes a powerful driver of influence. As Celente noted, the demographic and economic reality means the US can no longer assume automatic leadership in global economic policy. The very scale of BRICS economies allows them to trade more with each other, invest in their own industries, and sidestep the dollar in international transactions. The death of the dollar. Perhaps the most attention-grabbing part of Celente's analysis is his prediction that the dollar's decline isn't in the future, it's already started. He called it the death of the dollar and pointed to key decisions that accelerated the process. One was the 2018 move under President Donald Trump to lower interest rates, which Celente believes undermined the currency's long-term stability. In his view, the problem isn't just that the dollar is losing value, it's that the world is actively working to replace it. For decades, the dollar has been the currency of choice for global trade. But as more countries seek alternatives, its dominance is eroded from both ends, by internal US policy and by external rejection. BRICS and the push for a dollar-free system. The BRICS nations aren't just talking about reducing reliance on the dollar, they're building the infrastructure to make it possible. Plans are underway to expand trade in local currencies, establish cross-border payment systems outside Western control, and develop institutions that can compete with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
It bothers them because the Americans do not accept, under any circumstances, that any country in Latin America should have a leading role. They believe that the countries of Latin America must all remain subordinate to the guidance of the US State Department. The United States is actually afraid of losing its primacy as the world's sheriff. In fact, it doesn't want any competitors, not in the economic sphere, not in the technological sphere, nor in the military sphere.
For Washington, this is a serious challenge. The ability to control or influence global finance has long been a cornerstone of US power. If that leverage fades, so does a significant part of America's geopolitical influence. Gold's new role in the global economy. One of the clearest signs that the financial world is preparing for life beyond the US dollar is the surge in central bank gold buying. According to the World Gold Council's first quarter 2025 report, central banks purchased more than 244 metric tons of gold in just 3 months. Even more striking, 95% of these institutions said they plan to keep increasing their gold reserves over the next several years. Gold now accounts for nearly 20% of global central bank reserves, a level not seen in decades. This isn't just about portfolio diversification, it's about security. By holding gold, countries are protecting themselves from the reach of US monetary policy. Unlike dollar reserves or US bonds, gold is an asset Washington cannot freeze, seize, or sanction. A shift in priorities, from economy to military. Celente argues that the US has been prioritizing the wrong areas for decades. America's become the country that our founding fathers fought against, he said, pointing to the rise of the military-industrial complex. Instead of focusing on building a strong, diverse economy, resources have been poured into maintaining military dominance. That might secure strategic advantages, but it does little to strengthen the economic foundations necessary to compete with a coalition of nations determined to chart their own course. And in the long run, economic power, not military might, is what sustains currency dominance, the future of US influence. The changes Celente describes are not abstract theories. They're already visible in policy shifts, trade agreements, and currency experiments. When India keeps buying Russian oil in defiance of US sanctions, or when Brazil commits to closer trade ties with India despite tariffs, these are steps toward a different global order. Each move chips away at the system that has kept the dollar at the center of world trade since World War II. And because these changes are happening gradually, the US risks underestimating their cumulative effect until the tipping point is already passed. If Celente is right, the dollar won't collapse overnight. Instead, it will lose ground piece by piece, as countries find they can do business without it, and prefer to. Once a critical mass of trade happens outside the dollar system, returning to the old way becomes unlikely. That would mean a world where the US can no longer wield sanctions with the same effectiveness, where its ability to finance deficits by issuing debt is constrained, and where geopolitical influence has to be earned through partnerships rather than enforced through economic pressure.
They are leaving their mark on the international system. BRICS Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
The group of emerging economies known as BRICS,
trying to position itself as the voice for emerging economies and challenge Western dominance of global affairs.
For those who don't know, BRICS is nothing but an alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And on paper, these nations are so powerful that in 1995, while the PPP GDP of G7 countries was $17 trillion, BRICS only stood at $10 trillion. But in 2025, while the PPP GDP of G7 is $57 trillion, the BRICS countries together have a combined PPP GDP of $72 trillion.
What comes next? The immediate future will likely see more of the same: tariffs, counter-tariffs, and competing trade blocs. But the longer-term question is whether the US will adapt to this multipolar reality or continue trying to preserve a system that fewer countries want to participate in. For the BRICS nations, the strategy is clear: build economic self-sufficiency, trade with each other in local currencies, and develop independent financial institutions. For the US, the challenge will be finding a way to thrive in a world where its currency is no longer the default choice for global trade. The warning signs are there, the moves are already in motion, and whether Washington acknowledges it or not, the rest of the world is preparing for life beyond the dollar. The question is, how quickly will that future arrive, and who will be ready when it does? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the BRICS alliance can truly end the dollar's dominance? If you found this breakdown insightful and want to stay ahead on the biggest shifts in global power, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the updates that could shape the future of your wealth and the world.